Here is a great, deeply detailed, and very simple summary of everything you read about the early history and homeland of the Pushyabhuti dynasty, especially the region of Stanvishvara, Thanisar. I'll explain each part clearly, with added context and examples to help you understand every point. Deep summary, homeland of the Pushyabhutis. 1. Who were the Pushyabhutis? The Pushyabhuti dynasty was an ancient royal family in North India. Their most famous ruler was Harsha, a great king who later ruled much of North India around 606 to 647 CE. Before Harsha became emperor, his family ruled a small but important region, and they grew from there. Fact 2. Where was their original home? Their homeland was a city called Stanvishvara, now called Thanisar, in modern-day Haryana, Ambala district. This was both their home base and capital city before expanding to larger territories. 3. What does the name Stanvishvara mean? The name comes from two Sanskrit words, stanu, meaning still, firm, or immovable. It is also a name of Shiva, Ishvara, meaning God, especially Lord Shiva. So Stanvishvara means either the Lord who is firm, or referring to Shiva, or the place of Shiva, where Shiva is worshipped. 4. Why was this place religiously important? Stanvishvara was one of the oldest centers of Shiva worship. According to the Vamana Purana, it was here that Linga worship of Shiva first began. In Hindu stories like the Mahabharata and Harivamsha Purana, Shiva is called Stanu, and he is one of the 11 Rudras, fierce forms of Shiva. So people believed this was a sacred land, especially for Shaivites, followers of Shiva. 5. Geography and setting of the region. The city was located on the banks of the river Sarasvati. Sarasvati was a holy river in ancient times, though today it is mostly dried up. Rivers made the land good for farming, trading, and religious life. The region was full of mythological and sacred associations. 6. What do historical texts say about it? A. Bana's Harshacharita, 7th century CE. Bana was the royal poet in Harsha's court. He wrote a biography of Harsha called the Harshacharita. In it, he says, Stanvishvara was part of a larger area named after the serpent deity. It was a Janapada Vishesha, meaning a special, important region. Stanvishvara was the capital city of this region. B. Xuanzang, Yuan Chuang's account, 7th century CE. He was a Chinese Buddhist monk who visited India. He called Stanvishvara as Satanisu, his Chinese version of the name. He said it was northwest of Mathura, about 500 li away, around 83 miles. The entire kingdom was more than 7,000 li in area, very large. The capital city was about 20 li wide, about 3 to 4 miles. The capital was surrounded by a large sacred area called Dharmakshetra, place of religious merit. This was the battlefield of the Mahabharata war, today known as Kurukshetra. 7. What was Dharmakshetra, Kurukshetra? Dharmakshetra means field of Dharma or Holy Land. It is the site of the Mahabharata battle, where the Bhagavad Gita was spoken by Krishna to Arjuna. It lies close to Stanvishvara. Because of this, the whole region became sacred, attracting pilgrims, saints, and travelers for centuries. 8. How big was their kingdom? Historian Devahuti says, based on Indian and Chinese sources, Harsha's kingdom stretched from the Satluj River in the west to the upper Ganga region in the east. The original capital city of the Pushyabhutis was Stanvishvara, before Harsha moved it later. 9. What kind of life existed in Stanvishvara? A. Religious life. The city was a major Shiva pilgrimage center. Worship of the Shiva Linga was deeply rooted here. Nearby Kurukshetra made it even more sacred, attracting pilgrims and priests. B. Economic life. The river Sarasvati helped with irrigation and agriculture. Pilgrimage and temple visits encouraged trade, like shops, guest houses, food sellers. Good location near Mathura and Kurukshetra allowed easy trade routes. C. Social life. The population likely included priests and temple staff, farmers and traders, craftsmen, warriors, and scholars. As a capital city, it also had officials and royal family members. Final summary in one paragraph, ultra simple. The Pushyabhubudi dynasty, which later produced the Vardhana, began a small but holy city called Stanvishvara, modern Thanesar in Haryana. This city was a major center for the worship of Lord Shiva, and its name means the place of the firm Lord, Shiva. Ancient books say this was one of the first places where Shiva Linga worship began. It stood on the river Sarasvati and near Kurukshetra, the sacred battlefield of the Mahabharata, making the whole region full of religious power and legends. Important texts like the Harsha Charita and Chinese monk Xuanzang's travel notes describe its size, location, and holiness. This region, once small and sacred, became the starting point for the rise of Harsha's great empire. Would you like me to now create a map, timeline, or continue to the next part of Pushyabhubudi history? Here is a great, deep, and detailed summary of everything you just read in the simplest and clearest language possible, like explaining to someone with no background in history. I'll organize it into sections and add extra insights to help you fully understand the early history and life of the Pushyabhubudi homeland. 1. The sacred homeland. Kurukshetra, Thanesar. Before the Pushyabhubudi dynasty became powerful, the area of Thanesar, modern Thanesar in Haryana, near Ambala, was already a very holy and respected place. This area was known as Kurukshetra, the famous land from the Mahabharata epic where the Pandavas and Kauravas fought their war. It was considered a sacred land where religion, tradition, and dharma, moral duty, were deeply rooted. 2. Richness. Described by Bana, Harsha's court poet. Bana, the official poet of King Harsha, wrote a book called Harsha Charita, meaning Life of Harsha. In that, he gives a detailed and beautiful description of Harsha's homeland. According to him, the land was full of kind, law-abiding people who lived with honesty and harmony. The society was peaceful and good, like the Krita Yuga, the first and best age in Hindu belief, where everything was pure and just. There were fair laws, and people followed good behavior and religious values. 3. Agricultural prosperity, farming and food. The land was extremely fertile, meaning good for growing food. Bana paints a picture of endless crops and healthy harvests. Rice was everywhere, so much that it grew beyond field boundaries. Wheat and rajamasha, a type of bean, covered the high lands. Grains were so abundant that the edges of the land were packed with heaps of food. Fruits and milk were easy to get and available in large amounts. 4. Crops and fruits of the region. The land produced many types of fruits and luxury crops. Bananas, plantains, pomegranates, citrons like large lemons, grapes, dates, saffron, an expensive spice still used today. Bana even says coconuts grew there, though historians say this was probably an exaggeration because coconuts usually grow near coastal areas, not inland like Thanesar. 5. Animals in the region. The land was home to many useful and wild animals, showing it was full of life. Cows and buffaloes for milk and farming. Sheep, likely used for wool and meat. Horses and camels for transport and travel. Monkeys, parrots, and sparrows. Natural wildlife that made the area vibrant and green. This mix of animals, birds, plants, and people was a complete, healthy, and rich. 6. His observations. Mauryan Devahudi says, the lowest of Thanesar are still good for growing rice. The eastern part of the region still grows sugarcane. So, we can assume that even in Harsha's time, people were growing these same crops, proving that the land had great farming traditions. Final deep summary. Long before King Harsha made Thanesar famous under the Pushyabhubudi dynasty, the land was already well known as Kuru, a deeply and spiritual land. It was respected because of its connection to the Mahabharata war, making it one of the most sacred places in Indian tradition. Bana, a poet in Harsha's court, described the land as peaceful, rich, and full of honest, good people who lived by the highest moral values. The land produced so much food, rice, wheat, fruits, and milk, that there was no shortage or hunger. People lived in a way that reminded him of the golden age of purity, Krita Yuga. Fruits like bananas, pomegranates, grapes, and saffron made the land not only productive, but also luxurious. There were many animals, both for use and in the wild, showing that nature and human life were in perfect balance. The homeland of Harsha and the Pushyabhutis was not just politically important. It was a land of spiritual value, natural beauty, economic wealth, and social harmony. Would you like a story-style version next? Or a timeline or map-based view of the early Pushyabhuti land? Absolutely. Here's a great, deep, detailed summary of the entire passage you asked about, written in the simplest, clear way, like you're learning it from the world's best teacher. Deep, detailed summary. The economic life of Thanissar during Harsha's time. Thanissar, also called Stanvishvara, the capital of the Pushyabhuti dynasty and King Harsha's homeland, was not just a political center. It was also a rich and economically advanced region in northern India. Two main sources tell us about this area. 1. Bana's description from Harsha Charita. Bana was a court poet of Harsha and wrote a glorified poetic account of the region. He described Thanissar and the surrounding area, Kurukshet, land of peace, prosperity, and plenty. According to him, the people were good, noble, and well-behaved. Law and ethics were respected. It was as if a golden age, the Krita Yuga, still existed there. The land was very fertile, full of crops like rice, wheat, and beans. Milk, fruits, and food were available everywhere. He even listed many fruits, like bananas, pomegranates, grapes, saffron, and even coconuts, though that last one was probably an exaggeration. There were many animals: cows, buffaloes, horses, camels, monkeys, parrots, and sparrows. His account mainly celebrates the agricultural wealth and cultural richness of the region. 2. Xuanzang's, Yuan Chuang's description. Xuanzang, a Chinese Buddhist monk, visited India around 630 to 645 CE and gave a more realistic and practical description of the same region. He agreed that the soil was very fertile and crops grew well, but he added some things Bana didn't talk about. Not many people farmed. Only a few were involved in agriculture. Most people were traders and merchants. This means that trade and business were more important than farming for the local economy. He also said that the city was full of rare and imported goods from other places. Rich families competed with each other by spending lots of money and showing off their wealth extravagance. Why Bana didn't talk about trade? Devahuti's interpretation. Historian Huti suggests that Bana didn't talk much about trade because trade became more important later after Harsha's Western military campaigns. When Harsha conquered Western India, traders from Thanissar got access to Arabian seaports. Sea trade became easier. Also, after Harsha defeated the Huna invaders, the northwestern roads to places like Afghanistan and Persia became safe for land trade again. So trade expanded and boomed in Harsha's time, especially after those political events. But trade likely existed even before Harsha. The ruling family, the Pushyabhutis, Harsha's dynasty, belonged to the Vaishya caste, which is the business trading caste in ancient India. This suggests that trade and commerce were already strong in Thanissar even before Harsha's wars. The region was likely always a place where business and wealth were important. Final summary in simple points. Thanissar was a land with good soil, abundant crops, and wealth. Bana praised the land's agriculture, beauty, and culture. Xuanzang gave a more practical picture. Most people did business, and the city was full of luxury goods and rich families. Trade became even more important after Harsha's victories in the west and the defeat of the Hunas. But trade likely existed even earlier, since the ruling dynasty itself came from a merchant background. Would you like me to? A comic showing Bana and Xuanzang describing the land? A timeline of trade development in Thanissar? A chart or map showing trade routes? Let me know how you'd like to visualize or remember it. Here's a great, deep, and detailed summary in very simple language, like teaching a beginner. Topic: religious life in Stanvishvara, Thanissar, under the Pushyabhutis. 2 views. one by a Buddhist, Yuan Chuang, and one by a Hindu, Bana. Buddhism in Stanvishvara. Yuan Chuang's view. Yuan Chuang was a Chinese Buddhist monk who traveled to India around the 7th century. When he visited Stanvishvara, modern-day Thanesar, he was disappointed. Why? Because very few people followed Buddhism in the city. There were only 3 Buddhist monasteries. Around 700 monks lived there, and they all followed Hinayana Buddhism, an older school of Buddhism. On the other hand, there were over 100 Hindu temples. So Yuan Chuang realized that Hinduism was much more popular than Buddhism in this area. 2. Hinduism in Stanvishvara. Bana's view. Bana was a Hindu writer and a Brahmana, priestly class. He described the region with great pride because it followed Hindu customs and worship very strongly. According to him, the caste system was well organized and followed carefully. The city was like a perfect golden age, or even like heaven coming to earth. Wise Hindu sages, Brahmarshis, meditated here in peace and holiness. It was a very sacred and pure place. 3. Devotion to Lord Shivaism. The ruling dynasty of the city, the Pushyabhutish, worshipped Lord Shiva with total devotion. The king himself, from a very young age, loved Lord Shiva deeply. He ignored all other gods and only worshipped Shiva. He never ate without worshipping Shiva, even in dreams. He believed that Shiva was the greatest god, above all others. 4. The people followed their king. The king's deep love for Shiva influenced all his people. In every house, people worshipped Lord Shiva. The wind carried the smell of burning incense, used in rituals. People poured milk on Shiva idols and offered flower garlands. The whole city felt like a giant temple filled with religious life. 5. Gifts and rituals for Shiva. The people honored their king with gifts meant for Shiva's worship, like white bulls, sacred animals of Shiva, golden pots and lamps, jewels and sacred threads. These gifts showed that religion and kingship were closely connected. And 6. Even the queens took part. The king's wives, queens, also helped in temple activities. They threshed rice, used in rituals. They decorated temples with oils and perfumes. They and their servants made flower garlands for offerings. Overall summary. Thanesar was a strong Hindu city with deep devotion to Lord Shiva. Buddhism existed, but it was small and not very influential. Hinduism, especially Shaivism, was everywhere. In the king's heart, in the people's homes, in the temples, even in the air, full of incense, milk, and flowers. The city was like a living temple, and everyone, king, queens, people, took part in worship. Let me know if you'd like this as a comic strip, a temple scene illustration, or a time infographic of religious life. I can make it super clear and visual. Here is a great, deep, and very detailed summary provided, written in the simplest language possible, so that even a complete beginner can understand everything clearly. Topic: Origins and social background of the Pushyabhuti dynasty, Harsha's family. This passage explains who the Pushyabhutis were, what their social background was, what religion they followed, and how that helped them rise to power. It also talks about how King Harsha respected religious teachers. Scholars have debated his caste. 1. Harsha's respect for a Shaiva saint. Harsha, a famous king of the Pushyabhuti family, was deeply devoted to Lord Shiva. One day, a Shaiva teacher, a holy man who followed Shiva, named Bhairavacharya, came to Harsha's court, his royal palace. Harsha showed great respect to him, not just by words, but by everything. Himself, total surrender, saw the saint as a guide or guru. His harem, his royal wives or the women's quarters, his entire court, his officials, his treasury, his wealth and riches. This shows that Harsha's devotion to Shiva was real and powerful. He was ready to give up all worldly things for his faith. Why the Pushyabhuti family rose to power. The region where Harsha's family ruled, called Shrikanta Janapad, near present-day Thanesar, had 2 special features. 1. Most people belonged to the Vaishya caste, the trading and business class in Hindu society. 2. Shaivism, worship of Shiva, was the most popular religion there. Harsha's family, the Pushyabhutis, were Vaishyas from the trading caste, and Shaivas, devotees of Lord Shiva. So the people of that region naturally accepted the Pushyabhuti family as rulers because they shared the same caste, Vaishya, and the same religion, Shaivism. In simple words, the Pushyabhutis were one of them, so they got the support of the local people. Harsha's caste. What do ancient sources say? A Chinese monk named Chuang, all spelled Xuanzang, who stayed in India for 13 years, wrote that Harsha belonged to the Vaishya caste. This is the Chinese way of writing Vaishya, the trader caste. An old religious text called Aryamanjushri Mulakalpa also clearly says the Pushyabhutis were Vaishyas. Several modern historians and scholars agree with this. Tripathi says the name Pushyabhuti itself shows a Vaishya background because names with Bhuti were often used by Vaishyas. Devahuti, in her book on Harsha, also supports this view. Jayaswal, another scholar, also believed Harsha was a Vaishya, but he had a different theory. A king named Yashodharman Vishnubardhana of Malwa, a different region, had founded the Pushyabhuti dynasty. This idea was based on a mistake, a wrong translation made by another scholar named Fleet when he read an inscription, stone writing, from Mansour. Because this theory was based on a wrong reading, it is not accepted today. Key takeaways, most important points. 1. Harsha's family, the Pushyabhutis, came from the Vaishya, trader caste, not the usual royal caste. They followed Shaivism, the worship of Lord Shiva. 3. In their region, both Vaishyas and Shaivism were very popular. 4. This helped them gain power and become rulers because they matched the people's caste and faith. Or 5. Harsha was very deeply devoted to Shiva, so much that he offered his court and wealth to a Shaiva saint. 6. Multiple ancient and modern sources confirm Harsha was a Vaishya. 7. One scholar, Jayaswal, made a mistaken claim based on a wrong translation, but that theory is now rejected. Would you like this turned into a simple infographic or diagram? A story version for memory? A timeline rise? Let me know, and I'll make it even clearer for you. Here is a very simple, deeply clear, and detailed summary of the passage you shared. This summary explains everything in beginner-friendly language, like teaching someone with no background in history. Summary. Was Harsha a Kshatriya? A debate explained simply. Some scholars, like Cunningham, Buhler, and B.N. Sharma, believe that King Harsha and his dynasty, the Pushyabhutis, belonged to the Kshatriya class, the warrior and ruler caste in the Indian caste system. Why did they think this? These scholars used a sentence from an old book called the Harsha Charita, written by a poet named Bana. In that book, Bana says, the Pushyabhutis and the Malkaris were like the moon and the sun. In Sanskrit, this is Somasurya Vamshaviva Pushyabhuti Mukaravamshao. This means the Pushyabhuti and Malkari families were like the lunar and solar dynasties. In ancient India, the solar dynasty, Suryavamsha, and lunar dynasty, Somavamsha, were two famous royal families made of Kshatriyas like the legendary kings Rama and Krishna. So the scholars thought, if Bana compared Harsha's family to these great royal Kshatriya dynasties, that must mean Harsha was a Kshatriya too. But here's the counter-argument, the other side. This interpretation is probably wrong. The sentence in Harsha Charita is just a simile, a figure of speech, like saying he is as strong as a lion. It only means that Pushyabhutis and Malkaris were great and famous, just like the lunar and solar dynasties were great and famous. It does not mean that Harsha's family actually belonged to those dynasties or even to the Kshatriya caste. It's like saying she shines like the moon. It doesn't mean she is the moon. It just shows she's bright or beautiful. In logic and literature, there's a rule. A simile should not be stretched too far. So, we should not force a deeper meaning into a simple comparison. What about Yuan Xuanzang's account? Yuan Chuang, also called Xuanzang, was a Chinese monk and traveler who visited India during Harsha's time. He wrote that Harsha belonged to the Vaishya caste, which sounds similar to Vaishya, the merchant farmer caste. Cunningham rejected this and said, Yuan Chuang must have made a mistake. Harsha was a great king, so he must have been a Kshatriya. Maybe he was a Bais Rajput, a Kshatriya group, and Yuan Chuang confused Bais with Vaishya. But this logic is very weak and flawed. Why? Because Yuan Chuang was a careful observer. He clearly knew that not all kings in India were kshatriyas. In fact, he mentioned, King Dhruvabhata of Vallabhi was a kshatriya. The king of Sindh was a shudra, the lowest caste. Bhaskaravarman of Assam was a Brahmin. The ruler of Paryatra was a Vaishya. So Yuan Chuang did know the difference between castes and had no reason to get confused in Harsha's case. He probably knew exactly what Harsha's background was, especially since he met Harsha personally and traveled across his empire. Main conclusion, in simplest words. 1. Some people want to believe Harsha was a kshatriya because kings are often expected to be from the warrior caste. 2. They use weak evidence, a simile from a poem, and ignore solid facts, like Yuan Chuang's detailed records. 3. But a comparison in a poem doesn't prove someone's caste. 4. Yuan Chuang had no reason to be wrong. He stated Harsha was not a kshatriya, but from a different caste. 5. So the kshatriya label without real evidence. Extra simple example to understand this. Imagine someone says, Ravi and Rahul are like Sachin and Dhoni. That doesn't mean Ravi and Rahul are actually cricketers. It just means they are famous or great in some way. Same way, when Bana said Harsha's family was like the Moon and Sun dynasties, he just meant they were great and important, not they belonged to those dynasties or castes. Let me know if you'd like this in even simpler form or explain sentence by sentence. The great, deep, and detailed story of the passage you shared, written in the simplest possible language for a beginner, with extra summary. The founder of Harsha's family, King Pushyabhuti, the famous Sanskrit writer Bana, who wrote the Harsha-charita, a biography of King Harsha, tells us about the founder of Harsha's royal family, a king named Pushyabhuti, also spelled Pushpabhuti. He ruled in a place called Shrikantha, which was near modern-day Thanesar in Haryana, India. Pushyabhuti was the first known king of the Vardhana, Pushyabhuti dynasty. But Bana doesn't give us plain historical facts. Instead, he gives a highly poetic and praise-filled picture of Pushyabhuti, describing him using mythical comparisons to gods, mountains. These can be great, noble, wise, and strong Pushyabhuti was supposed to be, but they are not meant to be taken literally. They are literary praises, not actual facts. What kind of king was Pushyabhuti, according to Bana? Bana says Pushyabhuti was, like Indra, king of the gods, meaning very powerful. Like a bow that supports all castes, varnas, meaning he protected and supported people from all levels of society. Like the golden mountain Meru, meaning he had a shining and noble character. Like Mount Mandara, which attracted the goddess of wealth, meaning he drew fortune and glory toward himself. Like the ocean, which stays within its boundaries, meaning he followed rules and limits with discipline. Like the sky, which spread sound, meaning his fame was spread far and wide. Like the moon, which is linked to calmness and art, meaning he loved and appreciated the arts. Like the Vedas, sacred texts known for truth, meaning he always spoke the truth. Like the earth, which supports all life, meaning he took care of all people. Like the wind, which blows away dust, meaning he got rid of anger and ego from other kings. Like a guru or wise teacher, meaning his words were full of wisdom. Like King Prithu, known for generosity, meaning he had a kind heart. Like Vishala, symbol of great mind, meaning he had sharp intelligence. A king known for spiritual wisdom, meaning he lived a balanced, wise life. Like Suyatra, Sumantra, Arjuna, Bhishma, and others, all figures from Indian legends, meaning he had bravery, beauty, brilliance, strategy, and dignity. This long list paints a picture of Pushyabhuti as the perfect king, strong in battle, wise in speech, rich in wealth, kind in heart, and loved by his people. Was there any real historical value in this story? Among all these poetic comparisons, one detail might be a historical clue. Bana says Pushyabhuti was a Shura in defeating armies of heroes. This might mean he defeated the Surasenas, who were people living near Mathura, a city in North India, about 100 miles from Pushyabhuti's capital, Stanvishvara. This is important because Mathura was ruled during early times by the Nagas, a powerful group in North India. Scholars believe that the Pushyabhuti dynasty might have fought and defeated the Nagas of Mathura as part of their rise to power. Bana also mentions a local Naga chief, whom Pushyabhuti defeated in a duel, a one-on-one fight. This may be a fancy version of a real battle between Pushyabhuti and the Naga rulers. Archaeological evidence, like coins found in Mathura, shows that the Nagas were ruling that area in the early century CE. So, if Pushyabhuti fought with them, it suggests he might have lived in or shortly after that time, possibly in the early Gupta period. Final thoughts. What does this tell us? The story gives more legend than fact, but it still helps us understand how later generations honored their royal ancestors. It shows how Bana wanted to describe Pushyabhuti not just as a king, but as a superhuman figure, combining the best qualities of gods, warriors, and saints. Hidden behind the flowery words, there may be a real history of a local chief, Pushyabhuti, who defeated rival powers, possibly the Nagas, and built a kingdom, laying the foundation for his famous descendant, King Harsha. This is a great example of how Indian historical writing mixed history with imagination, especially when praising kings. Would you like this turned into a timeline, visual map, or a children's story version next? Or would you like the Harsha family tree starting from Pushyabhuti? Here is a great and very detailed summary of the passage, very simple-ish, just like teacher step-by-step. Detailed summary. This passage is about Pushyabhuti, the earliest known king of the dynasty that later produced Emperor Harsha. But historians believe that Pushyabhuti was not a powerful or independent king. He likely ruled a very small area, and even that was probably under the control of bigger empires, especially the Gupta Empire. Pushyabhuti's family probably did not rule freely. If they did become independent for a short time, they couldn't remain free for long. Why? Because during that time, the great Samudragupta ruled a very powerful Gupta Empire. Samudragupta had conquered almost all kingdoms east of the Chenab River, including the region where Pushyabhuti's family ruled. So, it's most likely that Pushyabhuti had to follow Gupta authority, just like a small ruler obeys a big emperor. About Pushyabhuti's reputation. Some stories describe Pushyabhuti as respected by people, his ministers, and even nearby kings. These stories say he was powerful enough to make other small kings pay tribute, gifts, or taxes to him. This makes him look like a strong local king, but still not powerful enough to challenge the Guptas. Harsha's silence on Pushyabhuti. Harsha, the most famous king of the dynasty, never mentions Pushyabhuti in his official stone inscriptions, called epigraphs. This is very important. It shows that even Harsha may have not thought Pushyabhuti was historically important. This makes us think that Pushyabhuti's story may have been more of a legend than real history. Legendary elements in the story. Later writings, especially by the poet Bana, Harsha's court writer, tell myth-like stories about Pushyabhuti. Bana focuses not on real battles or administration, but on a religious ritual that Pushyabhuti performed for Lord Shiva, a Saiva sacrifice. In that story, the goddess Lakshmi appears and blesses him. She says that he will be like a third light in the sky, along with the sun and moon, and will start a powerful royal family. She also says that in his line will come a great king named Harsha, who will be like a Satri, a legendary world-conquering king in Hindu stories. A mythical battle. The story also tells about a magical fight between Pushyabhuti and a Naga king. The Naga king is described as supernatural, not a normal human being. This battle also happens in connection with the religious ritual. What does all this mean? Most of what we know about Pushyabhuti comes from stories, not hard historical evidence. These stories are poetic and full of magic and divine blessings. So historians think Pushyabhuti was likely a very minor ruler, possibly under Gupta rule. His story became more famous and legendary later, especially after Harsha became powerful. Writers like Bana added myth and religion to make Pushyabuti's story look great. But in reality, Pushyabuti's real political role was very small, and he may not have had any big historical impact. Final point. Pushyabuti's importance in history is not based on real records, but on later stories filled with religious and mythical elements. His role was likely symbolic, used to give Harsha's royal family a noble and divine beginning, even if the real Pushyabuti was just a small local ruler. Would you like this turned into a timeline, character map, or visual chart for even more clarity? Here is a great, deep, detailed summary of the entire passage about Naravardhana, Rajavardhana first, and Adiyavardhana, written in the simplest way possible, like teaching someone completely new to this topic. Summary. The early kings of Harsha's family, before his father. We learn about 3 early kings in the Pushyabuti dynasty, who lived before Harsha's famous father, Prabhakaravardhana. These 3 kings were 1. Naravardhana, Harsha's great-grandfather. 2. Rajavardhana Ice, Harsha's grandfather. 3. Adityavardhana, Harsha's father's father, his paternal grandfather. We don't get this information from the poet Bana, who wrote Harsha's biography, but from Harsha's own royal inscriptions, which are official records carved on copper and stone. What Bana says, and what he doesn't. Bana only mentions that Pushyabuti, the founder of the dynasty, was the ancestor of a line of kings. He gives no names or important actions of the kings who ruled after Pushyabuti, but before Prabhakaravardhana, Harsha's father. His focus is more on legends and religious stories, like Pushyabuti doing a great Shiva sacrifice. Where the real historical information comes from. Harsha's Banskara and Madhubana inscriptions from 628 and 631 CE, and his Sonapat and Nalanda seals, give actual names and family connections of these earlier kings. These inscriptions mention 3 generations of kings, each called Maharaja, a title meaning great king, but not the highest like emperor. The 3 kings and their wives, based on inscriptions. King, queen, time ruled, approx. Naravardhana, Vajranadevi, 525 to 545 CE. Rajavardhana Adh, Apsarodevi, 545 to 565 CE. Adityavardhana Masenaguptadevi, 565 to 585 CE. These kings were most likely feudatories, meaning they ruled their region under the authority of more powerful empires like the Makharis or later Guptas. The queens are also mentioned, showing that royal women were remembered in official records, especially if they came from important families. Important political marriage. Adityavardhana and Mahasenagupta Devi. Adityavardhana married Mahasenagupta Devi, who was very likely the sister of Mahasenagupta, the king of the later Gupta dynasty. This marriage created a strong political bond between 2 important ruling families, the Pushyapish and the later Guptas. Larger political scene. Makharis and Gauda. At this time, the Makharis were the dominant power in North India. The later Guptas and Pushyabutis were probably under them. The later Gupta king, Mahasenagupta, after some time, seems to have come under the control of Shashanka, the powerful king of Gauda, Bengal. Shashanka's strength explains how Mahasenagupta was able to carry out a military campaign far to the east, near the Brahmaputra River, called Lauhitya in ancient text, where he captured 2 Kamarupa, Assam, princes. Historical importance of these details. These 3 kings, Naravardhana, Rajavardhana Erst, and Adityavardhana, helped lay the foundations for Harsha's rise to power. They were small kings, but over 3 generations they made smart political alliances, especially through marriage. By the time Harsha's father came to power, the family had gained strength, and Harsha would eventually become one of the greatest emperors of early medieval India. Conclusion. The Pushyabuti dynasty. Before Harsha, the early kings of the Pushyabuti family ruled quietly and steadily under the shadows of bigger powers. Their names survive not in poetry or legend, but in official inscriptions, proving that history is sometimes preserved more accurately in administrative records than in stories. They built political connections and strengthened their position through marriages and alliances. All this prepared the ground for Harsha, who would take the family to the highest level of power in North India. Would you like a simple visual timeline or family tree of these kings? I can make that too to help you remember better. Here is a great, deeply detailed but very simple summary of everything you've learned about ancestors, written like you're a total beginner and explained step by step for full clarity. Summary: Prabhakaravardhana and his family background. 1. Royal family and lineage. Prabhakaravardhana belonged to a royal family called the Pushyabhuti dynasty. This family ruled a region called Stanvishvara, modern Thanesar in Haryana. The family had several kings before Prabhakara, but they were not very powerful. They were probably small kings, serving under more powerful emperors like the Maukharis or Guptas. Not 2. Prabhakara's grandfather and father. His grandfather was Rajavardhana. His father was Adityavardhana. Both of them used the title Maharaj, which means great king, but not. These two kings ruled in the 500 CE before Prabhakara. They were probably feudatory rulers, meaning they ruled a region but under someone else's control, like being a manager, not the CEO. 3. Sun worship. Rajavardhana Adityavardhana, and Prabhakaravardhana all worshipped the sun god. This is shown by their titles and names. Aditya means sun. Prabhakara means light giver, another word for the sun. Ancient texts even describe them as Paramaditya Bhaktas, meaning great devotees of the sun god. So, worship of the sun was a strong family tradition. Number 4. Prabhakara's mother and powerful connection. Prabhakara's mother was probably the sister of a very powerful king named Mahasenagupta, who belonged to the later Gupta dynasty. That means Prabhakara's mother's side, maternal side, came from a very influential royal family. This marriage was likely arranged as a political alliance between two families under the Maukharis to make both sides stronger. Number 5. Prabhakaravardhana, the first powerful king. Prabhakaravardhana was the first king in his family to become truly independent. He didn't serve under any overlord. He ruled in the early 600 CE and was the father of Harshavardhana, one of India's greatest emperors. He was also known by the name Pratapashila, which means firm and brave like a rock. His bravery and rule were praised in a book called Harsha Charita, written by his court poet Banabhatha. 6. Coins and proof of his rule. Silver coins were found in Pitara, in modern-day Uttar Pradesh, with the name Sri Pratapashila written on them. These coins help us prove that Prabhakaravardhana was real and support what Bana wrote. 7. Bana's description of him. Bana described Prabhakara as coming from a line of kings with great armies, who were strong enough to protect the whole world. He called Prabhakara a king of kings, which is a title used for emperors, meaning he ruled many smaller kings under him. In short, very simple words, Prabhakara came from a small royal family. His family worshipped the sun god, and their names even mean sun. His mother was from a powerful family, the later Guptas. He was the first in his family to become fully independent and powerful. He was called brave and strong like a rock, Pratapashila. Coins and poetry prove that he ruled well and was respected. His son, Harshavardhana, would go on to become one of India's greatest kings. Let me know if you want a family tree diagram, a timeline, or an easy quiz. Remember this better. Here is a very deep, clear, and simple summary of the full passage about Prabhakaravardhana, the father of Harsha, based on everything we've discussed so far. It explains who he was, what kind of king he was, and what the sources say about him, in a way anyone can understand. Detailed summary of Prabhakaravardhana's reign. 1. His titles show he was a very powerful king. Ancient writers and inscriptions give Prabhakaravardhana very grand titles. Rajadhiraja equals King of Kings. Maharajadhiraja equals Great King of Kings. Paramabhataraka equals Supreme Lord. These titles show that he was not under anyone else's rule. He ruled independently and was seen as one of the most important kings of his time. Modern historian Burr says he must have been a strong and successful king who rose to power because of his bravery and skill in war. 2. He was a fierce warrior, feared by many neighboring kings. Bana, the court poet, praised Prabhakaravardhana in very poetic ways, comparing him to terrible natural disasters or wild animals. He was like a lion hunting the Hunas, a Central Asian tribe. He was like a fever to the king of Sindhu in today's Pakistan. He kept the Gurjaras awake at night. They feared him. He was a plague to the proud king of Gandhara in Afghanistan. He destroyed the lawlessness or power of the Latas, a kingdom in Gujarat. He was an axe that cut down the royal fortune, Lakshmi of Malava, a kingdom in central India. This poetic list shows how many kings feared him, even if he didn't conquer their lands completely. 3. He was ambitious and loved war. According to historian Devahudi, these poetic descriptions tell us something important. Prabhakaravardhana was very ambitious. He was always ready to attack other kingdoms, even if the reason was small. He enjoyed war. To him, fighting was a gift, and finding an enemy was like finding treasure. This shows he had a very aggressive personality, and he believed glory came through warfare. 4. He became famous and respected by other kings. Because of his constant military, he gained great fame and status. Even if he made his kingdom of Stani Ishvara, modern Thanesar, Haryana, strong and feared. He became well known among the rulers of northern and western India. 5. He challenged natural and political boundaries. Bana says Prabhakaravardhana leveled forests, hills, anthills, trees, and caves in his campaigns. This poetic image means he destroyed everything in his way, both natural and man-made, crossed boundaries, both physical, like rivers or hills, and political, like borders between kingdoms. In ancient times, natural things, like rivers, trees, and caves, marked the edges of kingdoms. So, when he leveled or crossed these, it meant he was pushing into other territories. Final summary, Prabhakaravardhana was a bold and fearless king. He held grand titles like King of Kings and Supreme Lord. He was deeply ambitious and had a war-loving, aggressive spirit. Even though he may not have taken much land, he terrified his neighbors through war. He attacked many kingdoms like the Hunas, Sindhu, Gurjaras, Gandhara, Lata, and Malava. Because of this, he earned great fame and respect during his life. His military style expanded the power and image of his dynasty. He was the first truly powerful king in the Pushyabhudi dynasty, preparing the way for his son, Harshavardhana, to become an emperor. Would you like a map, a timeline, or a visual summary chart next to help remember this better? Sure. Here's a deep, detailed message about the early Pushyabhudis and their overlords. Deep, detailed summary. The early Pushyabhudi dynasty, founded King Pushyabhudi, existed during the powerful Gupta Empire. Because the Gupta Empire controlled much of northern India, these were not fully independent kings, but rather subordinate rulers, like local chiefs or regional kings, who owed loyalty to the Gupta emperors. King Pushyabhudi himself may have fought in battles on behalf of the Gupta emperor Samudragupta. For example, he likely fought against the Nagas of Mathura as part of Gupta military campaigns. This shows that Pushyabhudi worked under Gupta orders and helped maintain the empire's control. The early rulers of the Pushya, including the 3 kings before Prabhakaravardhana, used the title Maharaja, which is Great King. However, in the 6th century, this title usually implied a subordinate status, meaning these kings were powerful, but still under a higher emperor's authority. This situation was similar to the Maukharis, another neighboring dynasty, who also started as subordinate rulers and later became independent. Prabhakaravardhana was the first Pushyabhudi king to take the grander title, Maharaja Dhiraja, meaning King of Great Kings, or Emperor. This title declared a higher, more independent status. But before assuming this imperial title, Prabhakaravardhana was probably still a subordinate Maharaja himself. A key question arises. Did Prabhakaravardhana wage his military campaigns as a subordinate king serving another emperor, or did he fight as an independent emperor to increase his own power? It's possible he fought some wars while still subordinate and others after becoming emperor. The timing of when he took the imperial title is crucial for understanding his political status. To clarify this, historians want to identify 1. Who was the suzerain or overlord to whom the Pushyabhutis owed loyalty when Prabhakara Vardhana became king? Until when did Prabhakara Vardhana continue to recognize that overlord's authority? In summary, the early Pushyabhutis started as regional rulers under the Guptas. They used lesser royal titles indicating subordinate status. When the Gupta Empire declined, they gradually gained independence. Prabhakara Vardhana's rise to imperial status marks this shift, but it's unclear exactly when he became fully independent. Understanding this transition helps explain the political and military actions of the Pushyabhuti dynasty during that period. Would you like me to add even more context on the Gupta Empire or Pushyabhuti military campaigns? It's a great, deep, detailed summary of the entire in the simplest possible English, like teaching a beginner. Main point. This passage is about the early history of the Pushyabhuti dynasty, especially about their political status. It discusses whether these early rulers were independent or if they were under the control, feudatories of bigger empires, like the Guptas, the Hunas, the Mauryaas, or the Aulikaras. Key people and dynasties. 1. Pushyabhuti kings, Naravardhana, Rajavardhana I, Adityavardhana. These were the early kings of the Pushyabhuti family, before the famous king Harshavardhana. 2. Bigger powers possibly ruling over them. Guptas, a great Indian empire before the Pushyabhutis. Hunas, foreign invaders from Central Asia, powerful in North India in the 400s to 500 CE. Mauryaas, a nearby Indian dynasty, powerful than the Pushyabhutis. Aulikaras dynasty, known for King Yashodharman, who fought the Hunas. What different historians say? 1. R.C. Majumdar, historian. He said that the early Pushyabhuti rulers were probably not independent. They might have served under the Guptas, or the Hunas, or the Mauryaas, depending on the time. For example, Naravardhana, the first king, may have been a feudatory of the Huna emperor Mihirakula, because Mihirakula ruled his region during Naravardhana's time. 2. B.N. Sharma, another historian, he agreed that the Pushyabhutis could have been under Guptas or Mauryaas, but he disagreed that they were under the Hunas. His reason, Prabhakara Vardhana, a later king, fought against the Hunas, so he thinks the dynasty wouldn't have served them. 3. Correction of Sharma's misunderstanding. The writer explains that R.C. Majumdar was not talking about Prabhakara Vardhana, but about the earlier kings like Naravardhan. So Sharma misunderstood the argument. Why it's likely that Naravardhana served the Hunas. Naravardhana lived during the time of the Huna king Mihirakula, who ruled a very large area from Gandhara and Kashmir to Gwalior. Mihirakula's rule was strong and long, at least 15 years, we know this from inscriptions. The Pushyabhuti capital, inside Mihirakula's empire, and maybe even in its center. Mihirakula was known to worship Lord Shiva, especially under the name Stanu, who was worshipped in Stanbishvara. This suggests Mihirakula may have even stayed in Stanbishvara, or made it his capital. That makes it very likely that Naravardhana, who ruled there, was under Mihirakula's control. Final conclusion. The first Pushyabhuti king, Naravardhana, was likely a feudatory under the Hunas, especially Mihirakula. He may also have acknowledged the authority of the Aulikaras, another major dynasty. This shows that in the early days, the Pushyabhuti family was not powerful or independent. They grew powerful later, especially under Prabhakara Vardhana and Harsha Vardhana. Why this matters? This shows how. Dynasties often start small, under other rulers. Over time, they can become independent and powerful, as the Pushyabhutis did. Political history is complex. Kings may serve different overlords at different times. Religious clues, like Mihirakula worshipping Shiva, and inscriptions help us understand history better. Would you like me to also make a timeline, or a map sketch, or visual diagram to show all these relations more clearly? Here is a deep, detailed, and simple summary of the passage, explained like you're new to Indian history, with background, characters, timeline, situation, and evidence. Everything made very clear and beginner-friendly. Main idea of the passage. Super simple version. This passage argues that in the late 500 CE, the Pushyabhuti dynasty, Harsha's family, was not independent, controlled by the Maukari dynasty, who were the most powerful kings in North India at that time. The writer gives many strong pieces of evidence, like seals and inscriptions, to support this idea, and says that even Harsha's father, Prabhakaravardhana, may have accepted Maukari authority until the last part of his life. 1. Political background. What happened before? By the second half of the 6th century CE, around 550 to 600 CE, many old empires in North India had collapsed, including the Guptas, who had once ruled a huge part of India, the Hunas, foreign invaders who had strong power for a while, the Aulikaras, a local dynasty in Malwa. This power vacuum, empty throne, allowed a new power to rise. 2. Rise of the Maukaris. After these older powers collapsed, the Maukaris, a dynasty based in Kannauj, modern-day Uttar Pradesh, become the strongest rulers in North India. Kings like Isanavarman, Sarvavarman, and Avarman expanded Maukari rule. Their power reached Magadha, important ancient region in modern Bihar and other parts of eastern Uttar Pradesh. 3. Pushyabhutis were likely subordinate to the Maukaris. The Pushyabhutis, the family of Harsha, were ruling from Stanishvara, modern Thanesar in Haryana. But this passage argues that they were probably under the control, suzerainty, of the Maukaris in the 6th century. Even Prabhakaravardhana, Harsha's father, may have accepted this subordinate position until late in his life. No earlier historians have fully explained this theory, but the author here says that it can be strongly argued and proven using real historical evidence. Strong archaeological and epigraphic evidence, proofs. The writer supports the theory using real historical materials, like A. Seals, found in key areas. Seals, official royal stamps of Maukari kings, have been found in places like Sonag, Uttar Pradesh, seal of Avantivarman, Nalanda, Bihar, seals of Sarvavarman, Avantivarman, and his son, Su. These show that the Maukaris controlled these regions. B. Inscriptions from Sirpur. An inscription from Sirpur, Chhattisgarh, mentions a king named Suryavarman from the Varman family, praised for his rule over Magadha. Scholars identify him as the son of Isanavarman, a known Maukari king. This proves the Maukaris ruled Magadha. See Deo Baranark inscription. A very important inscription from Deo Baranark, Bihar, issued by Jivatagupta II, a late Gupta king, shows that Maukaris, like Sarvavarman and Avantivarman, had the right to confirm land grants originally issued by Gupta kings. This proves that the Maukaris replaced the Guptas as rulers in Magadha. 5. Maukaris ruled Magadha, but not further east. The Maukaris ruled up to Magadha, but did not rule Bengal further east. However, they had military conflicts with the Gaudas, a kingdom in Bengal. These rivalries led to the Gauda king Shashanka attacking and killing Grahavarman, a Maukari prince, many years later. 6. What this all means, the Maukaris were the top power in North India after the fall of the Guptas and Hunas. The Pushyabhutis were a small dynasty at that time, and they likely accepted Maukari authority. The writer says that this was true even during the life of Harsha's father. The real power shift came after the fall of the Maukaris and the rise of Harsha himself. Conclusion. What we learn from this. This passage shows how one dynasty, Maukaris, became imperial rulers after older empires fell. It also helps us understand that the famous Harsha's family did not start out powerful. They were under stronger kings, Maukaris. Over time, Harsha broke free and became a major ruler after the fall of the Maukari line. Would you like me to now explain what happened next? How Harsha took power, how the Maukaris fell, and how Harsha united North India?